"She's not coming up," a voice cracked through the air as a massive orca plunged beneath the surface, dragging veteran trainer Maris Ellington down with him. "Get the divers in the water, now! Call 911, this is not a drill." It was a clear, sunlit morning in May 2022. At Oceanica Marine Park, visitors gathered for what was supposed to be an unforgettable experience. A chance to witness the intelligence and majesty of the ocean's most powerful predator, the killer whale. But just minutes into a routine training session, the atmosphere shifted. Shout echoed across the stands. Trainers rushed, alarms blared. One of the park's most experienced trainers, 34-year-old Maris Ellington, had disappeared beneath the surface of the Orca tank. She would never surface alive again. What happened in those final frantic moments? Was it a tragic accident or something far more preventable? The answers lie in a disturbing trail of behavioral warnings, safety violations, and shocking similarities to past incidents the marine park industry hoped you'd forget. This is the story of the terrifying last moments of Maris Ellington. But first, welcome to Animal Quest channel, where we dig deep into real stories behind nature's most shocking encounters. If you're into true survival, animal intelligence, and gripping near-death encounters, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share it with someone who thinks they know the ocean. Now let's go beneath the surface. Maris Ellington was not just another name on the staff roster at Oceanica Marine Park. She was a force of nature, calm, confident, and commanding in her connection with the ocean's most feared and admired predator. At just 34, she had become one of the youngest senior marine mammal trainers in the country, known across the industry for her deep understanding of orca behavior and her almost telepathic bond with the animals she worked with. Born and raised in Port Townsend, Washington, a quiet coastal town nestled along the Puget Sound, Maris grew up watching pods of wild orcas breach the surface just offshore. While most kids her age were watching cartoons, Maris was reading marine biology journals and sketching the anatomy of killer whales from her father's field guides. By 10 years old, she was writing letters to SeaWorld asking how she could become a trainer. By 16, she was volunteering at a local marine rehabilitation center. She graduated summa cum laude from the University of British Columbia with a degree in marine biology and animal behavior. Her thesis? A detailed behavioral study of maternal pod communication in transient killer whales. A rare and complex subject for a young researcher. But Maris was anything but ordinary. After college, she trained briefly at small aquariums along the West Coast before being recruited by Oceanica Marine Park, where she quickly rose through the ranks. Her reputation wasn't built on showmanship or crowd-pleasing tricks. It was built on patience, research, and a calm assertiveness that even the most unpredictable orcas seemed to respect. Colleagues often said she had water in her blood. She moved through the pools like she belonged there, always watching, always adapting. More than once, she intervened in tense situations with split-second decisions that likely saved lives, both human and animal. Guests who saw her perform remembered her not for theatrics, but for the quiet power she held as she swam beside creatures that outweighed her by 10 tons. But even the most experienced trainers know, when you step into the water with an apex predator, respect is not enough. Control is never guaranteed, and trust is never absolute. As her profile grew, so did the risks she faced. Maris knew this, and she accepted it. What she could never have known was that the orca she trusted most would be the one to turn on her. Koa was Oceanica's crown jewel, a massive 12,500-pound bull orca with a dorsal fin that curved like a black sail and a presence that could silence a crowd. He was the park's most valuable asset and its biggest liability, a creature of raw power and unpredictable temperament, spectacular in performance, dangerous in silence. He hadn't been born into captivity. Koa's story began thousands of miles away in the murky waters off the southern coast of Chile. In 2011, during an international sting operation targeting an illegal marine wildlife trafficking ring, authorities discovered a covert facility, rusting tanks, crude medical equipment, and 4 malnourished orcas. including a juvenile male barely old enough to be weaned. That orca was Koa. By the time Oceanica took custody of him, Koa was already showing signs of severe psychological distress. He was unresponsive to basic vocal cues, swam in slow, repetitive circles, and exhibited classic signs of what marine behaviorists call stereotypy, a term used to describe the neurotic pacing and rocking motions common in zoo and aquarium animals under prolonged stress. It's the behavioral footprint of captivity trauma, and for Koa, it never fully disappeared. Despite years of rehabilitation and conditioning, Koa remained volatile. Trainers had learned to read the warning signs: prolonged surface floating, sudden fluke slaps, refusal to participate. There were unconfirmed reports that Koa had once breached the surface mid-performance and landed dangerously close to a junior trainer. In another instance, a safety diver claimed the orca pinned him against the wall for several seconds before releasing him, long enough to send the diver into early retirement. Yet with every successful show, those warnings seemed to fade into the background. His aggression was framed as sensitivity, his unpredictability as a challenge to be overcome. And no one embraced that challenge more than Maris Ellington. The two shared a complex working relationship. Maris had spent more time with Koa than any other trainer on staff. She understood his triggers, his pacing, even his moods. Some days he was calm and receptive, even playful. On others, he retreated into the deep end of the tank, hovering silently, eye trained on the surface like he was waiting for something or someone. Behavioral analysts later compared his profile to that of Tilikum, the infamous orca linked to 3 deaths across 2 marine parks. Like Tilikum, Koa was large, intelligent, and carried a fractured past. Both had experienced trauma during developmental years. Both had been transferred between facilities. Both had long periods of social isolation, and both had exhibited a shocking tendency, a fixation on specific trainers. In the weeks leading up to the incident, logs showed that Koa had begun refusing food if it wasn't offered by Maris. During one session, he ignored hand signals from 2 senior trainers, only to comply moments later when Maris entered the pool. Some saw it as trust, others as something far more dangerous, because in captivity, trust can become an obsession. And with an animal as powerful as Koa, obsession can turn deadly in an instant. May 14, 2022, began like any other Saturday at Oceanica Marine Park. The sky over the park was clear, the breeze coming in from the Pacific light and cool. Trainers arrived early. Visitors lined up at the gates. Behind the scenes, the marine mammal team prepared for a full day of shows and enrichment sessions. At precisely 9:46 a.m., Maris Ellington signed into the pool deck access terminal and began suiting up for what was scheduled as a standard reinforcement session with Koa. This wasn't a public performance, no cheering crowd, no music, just a focused, controlled training block to reinforce known behaviors, test cognitive response, and strengthen the human-animal bond. But even before Maris entered the pool, the day had already started to drift off course. Koa had been acting unusually for days. On May 10th, he floated motionless at the bottom of the tank for nearly 7 minutes during a morning routine. On May 11th, he refused 3 separate bridge signals from his backup trainer, something he hadn't done in over a year. And on May 12th, he performed a full breach unprompted, narrowly missing the perimeter barrier. A move that rattled 2 junior trainers who were observing from the walkway. All of these incidents were noted in the behavioral logs, and all of them were flagged as non-critical. That morning, a senior behaviorist quietly expressed concern to the duty lead, noting Koa's lack of sleep during the previous night. Infrared monitoring had shown him swimming laps from midnight until nearly 4 a.m. Fast, agitated laps with abrupt direction changes, a classic sign of heightened arousal or internal stress. But the schedule was full. The park was operating at near capacity for the first time since reopening post-COVID. Every show, every session mattered. At 10:03 a.m., Maris stepped onto the wet platform, gave a short whistle cue, and slid into the tank. From the control booth, everything looked routine. Koa responded promptly to the first series of tactile signals. He swam in a tight circle, vocalized on cue, and allowed Maris to examine his fluke. It appeared to be another seamless session in the making. Then something shifted. Maris gave a hand signal indicating a side breach. Koa didn't move. Instead, he slowly sank beneath the surface and hovered just out of reach. 30 seconds passed, then 60. Maris remained composed, repeating the cue with slight variation. At 10:05 a.m., Koa surged upward, not for the breach, but directly toward Maris. What happened next was not immediate aggression, it was closer to a test. A boundary pushed. Koa circled tightly, brushing past her with deliberate proximity. Trainers call this shadowing, a behavior that can be either playful or territorial. In this case, it was neither. At 10:06 a.m., Koa bumped her lightly with his rostrum. She signaled disengagement. He ignored it. From the edge of the pool, the safety diver took a step forward. Then Koa dove again. What followed was just 24 seconds of chaos, but enough to alter the course of the day and the history of Oceanica itself. Koa burst from the water, caught Maris by the forearm, and dragged her beneath the surface with shocking speed. She attempted a release maneuver, a twisting technique designed to redirect an orca's grip. But Koa clamped down harder. Emergency protocols were triggered. A net was deployed, but snagged on a mechanical winch. Trainers pounded the water, threw distraction buoys, used piercing underwater tones meant to disrupt orca focus. None worked. In those terrifying moments, Maris was completely at the mercy of an animal she had trusted for over 6 years, and Koa was no longer responding to any of them. The first scream came from the north side of the observation deck. A child watching the tank through the thick acrylic pointed and cried out just as Koa surged from the depths, thrashing water in every direction. At 10:06 a.m., Maris Ellington disappeared beneath the surface. Held fast in the jaws of a 12,500-pound predator she once considered her closest companion. Handlers on deck immediately triggered the emergency response protocol. A klaxon blared over the PA system. Visitors were quickly ushered away from the glass, though many remained, frozen, confused, some already filming. Inside the pool, chaos erupted. Koa began what trainers later described as displacement behavior, a deadly pattern of dragging, dunking, and spinning the victim without any sign of release intent. This was not a mistaken grab. This was control, power, a display of force honed by years of captive frustration. The water turned turbulent within seconds. Murky, foam-laced, the pristine clarity of the tank vanished as Koa whipped through tight turns, dragging Maris deeper each time. From the safety deck, 2 senior trainers shouted hand signals. One tossed a bait pail into the water, hoping to divert his focus. A third slammed the manual net release, but the winch mechanism, due for inspection, jammed on deployment. The emergency barrier only deployed halfway, sagging uselessly against the far wall. Divers stood down. No one could enter with the animal in full aggression mode. Maris surfaced briefly, arms flailing, mouth open in a desperate shout, before being yanked violently backward in a gush of foam and blood. One witness later said it looked like a scene from a shark attack movie. But this was real, and it was unfolding in front of nearly 100 stunned guests. Inside the control booth, a staff member made the call. Code red. Paramedics and animal response teams were scrambled. Within minutes, emergency personnel were racing across the deck. At 10:09 a.m., Koa breached with Maris still in his grip, now limp, her wetsuit torn, her breathing unknown. He circled her body, nudged it once, then let her float. For nearly a full minute, he remained by her side, unmoving. Some interpreted this as recognition, regret, confusion, but others saw it differently. Koa wasn't just reacting, he was reclaiming control. In a life defined by commands, clicks, whistles, and rewards, this moment was entirely his. At 10:11 a.m., handlers finally used a high-frequency underwater pulse to push Koa toward the isolation gate. It worked, barely. The gate slammed shut, separating him from the main pool. Divers retrieved Maris's body within 90 seconds. She had suffered multiple internal injuries, a shattered collarbone, and deep lacerations to her torso and legs. Despite resuscitation efforts on site, Maris Ellington was pronounced dead at 10:28 a.m. Koa, the park's most prized orca, had just claimed his first victim. But for those who had worked beside him, the real shock wasn't that it happened, it was that it hadn't happened sooner. The death of Maris Ellington sent shockwaves through the marine park industry. Within hours, news of the attack flooded national headlines. Trainer killed by Orca during session, tragedy at Oceanica Marine Park, killer whale turns deadly. Oceanica's public relations team issued a carefully worded statement by noon, calling the event a tragic accident during a routine behavioral session. But behind the scenes, the word accident quickly became the subject of intense scrutiny. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, arrived on site by early afternoon. Within 48 hours, an official inquiry had been launched into potential safety violations and procedural lapses. What investigators uncovered painted a disturbing picture. Maris had voiced concern about Koa's behavior in the weeks prior. Internal logs documented several unusual episodes: refusals, late-night pacing, increased vocalizations, but no formal behavioral intervention had been initiated. Her final session had proceeded without a backup trainer in the water, a decision attributed to staffing shortages that week. Then came the technical failures. The emergency net system, designed to deploy within 10 seconds of a code red, failed due to a corroded winch gear, an issue flagged during a maintenance inspection 6 months earlier, but never resolved. The isolation gate, while ultimately successful, was operating on a delay due to outdated hydraulic sensors. Most damning of all, however, was the behavioral record. Koa had been flagged 5 times in the previous quarter for erratic responses during training. One entry, dated April 18th, simply read, "Shadowed Maris for 6 minutes. Broke eye contact only once." It had been labeled non-threatening. In a post-incident interview, a junior trainer admitted they'd begun referring to Koa's deep stares as the 100-yard look, a term borrowed from combat psychology used to describe a blank, focused expression in moments before violence. The fallout was swift. On June 3, 2022, a special congressional subcommittee was convened to review the regulation of captive marine mammals. Modeled closely after the hearings following the Tilikum incident in 2010, this session included testimony from former trainers, marine psychologists, OSHA regulators, and animal rights advocates. One former Oceanica employee described a culture of silence, where staff were discouraged from reporting incidents that might delay show schedules or affect revenue. Another trainer broke down in tears as she recalled how Maris often stayed late, revising session plans and reviewing safety drills, as if she knew something was going to happen. Oceanica's leadership, facing mounting pressure, suspended all in-water interactions with orcas indefinitely. Behind closed doors, discussions began about Koa's fate. Would he be retired, relocated, or, in a move certain to ignite public outrage, euthanized? Meanwhile, a petition titled "Justice for Maris" had gathered over 1.4 million signatures within a week. The public demanded accountability, not just for the failed equipment or the ignored warning signs, but for the deeper truth that could no longer be hidden. No matter how skilled the trainer, how advanced the protocols, or how strong the bond, an orca is not a performer. It is a predator. And captivity, no matter how polished, cannot cage its instincts forever. In the weeks that followed Maris Ellington's death, silence fell over Oceanica Marine Park. The orca shows were canceled indefinitely. The viewing galleries were roped off. For the first time in years, the pool sat still. But beyond the stillness, a new wave had begun to rise. Maris's funeral was held on the cliffs overlooking La Jolla Cove, a place she had visited often as a student and diver, where she once said she felt closest to the ocean. Hundreds attended, from trainers and marine scientists to grieving park guests and environmental advocates who had never met her, but felt they knew her story, her parents, Helen and Dr. Leonard Ellington stood at the podium and made an unexpected announcement: the launch of the Ellington Oceanic Trust, a nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing ethical marine mammal research, promoting rehabilitation over captivity, and pushing for an end to forced orca performances worldwide. It wasn't just a tribute, it was a mission. The Trust's first campaign, Free the Silence, focused on the psychological toll of confinement on intelligent marine mammals. Using footage from Maris's own behavioral research, they released a series of viral videos that reached millions within days, highlighting not only her tragic end, but the quiet suffering that had preceded it. Within months, public pressure surged. Oceanica retired 3 aging orcas to a newly developed sea pen sanctuary in the Baja Gulf, one of the first steps by a U.S. park toward transitioning animals out of performance life. The move was largely credited to the visibility and persistence of the Ellington Trust. At the University of Washington, where Maris had earned her master's in marine biology, a research wing was renamed in her honor. The Ellington Center for Marine Ethics now hosts an annual symposium where experts from around the world gather to discuss humane aquatic animal care and the psychological impacts of captivity. But perhaps the most enduring legacy came not from institutions, but from voices. Young students inspired by Maris's story began enrolling in oceanography programs. Former trainers, once silent, came forward with their own accounts. And among marine parks worldwide, new training guidelines were introduced under a single banner: the Ellington Standard. Though her life ended in a moment of horror, Maris Ellington's voice only grew louder in death. Not through words, but through action, through change, and through the countless lives, both human and animal, her story would go on to affect. This tragedy reminds us of the powerful forces we try to tame. Orcas are not entertainers. They are apex predators with intelligence, emotion, and memory. The same intelligence that allows them to learn commands, form bonds, and perform tricks is also the same intelligence that makes them capable of understanding their environment, their captivity, and the inherent limitations of that captivity. Koa's attack on Maris was not a freak accident. It was the culmination of years of stress, confusion, and isolation, something that all too many captive orcas endure in silence. In the wild, orcas travel in pods, navigate vast oceans, and exhibit complex social behaviors. They are meant to be free, not confined to tanks, not reduced to performing for human entertainment. What happened at Oceanica was a tragic reminder that we, as humans, must ask ourselves difficult questions about what we owe the animals we hold in our care. Can we continue to prioritize our entertainment and profits over their well-being? And can we truly claim to understand the emotional lives of creatures so vastly different from ourselves? The legacy of Maris Ellington challenges us to rethink everything we know about marine mammal care and the future of captive wildlife. If you care about marine life and trainer safety, share this video and support ethical wildlife programs. Stand with those fighting for the end of forced performances, for better conditions for animals in captivity, and for a future where our oceans are respected, not exploited. It's time to give orcas and all marine life the freedom they deserve. Thanks for watching.